The life insurance policy was spread across the mahogany table at Harbor View Restaurant when I slid the divorce papers next to Mark's untouched lobster bisque. His face went white as fresh snow when he saw the signature line already filled out in my careful handwriting. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Congratulations on planning my accident, I said quietly, watching his hand shake as he realized I knew about the drowning statistics research, the modified boat engine, and the very specific life insurance policy he'd purchased just 3 months ago. The woman beside him, Ashley Parker from his office, looked confused until I placed the printed search history on the table. How long does it take to drown in Clearwater Lake in October water temperatures? Was highlighted in yellow. The smell of chlorine mixed with morning coffee should have been comforting, but as I stood by our infinity pool overlooking Clearwater Lake that Tuesday morning, something felt fundamentally wrong. Mark was hunched over his laptop at the outdoor table, completely absorbed in whatever was on his screen, occasionally jotting notes in that leather-bound journal he'd started carrying everywhere. When I approached with his favorite cinnamon, "Coffee?" He slammed the laptop shut so fast the sound echoed across the water like a gunshot. "Just work stuff," he said, not meeting my eyes, his voice carrying that strained quality it had developed over the past few months. "Thompson Marine Insurance is reviewing some complicated claims." He grabbed the coffee without his usual thanks. "You kiss," already reaching for his phone to check messages that seemed to arrive at all hours of the day and night. Our life in Riverside Valley had always felt like something out of a magazine spread. The sprawling contemporary home with floor-to-ceiling windows framing views of Clearwater Lake, the private dock where our 30-foot cabin cruiser bobbed gently in the morning light, the manicured gardens that sloped down to the water's edge. Mark had built Thompson Marine Insurance from nothing into the most successful marine insurance company in Oregon, specializing in boat accidents and water-related claims. His expertise had made us wealthy, respected in our community, and seemingly secure. I had been Rachel Mitchell before becoming Rachel Thompson 12 years ago, trading my marketing career for the role of devoted wife and mother. At 38, I managed our household with the same precision Mark applied to his insurance investigations, coordinating Tyler's soccer tournaments and Chloe's dance recitals, hosting dinner parties for Mark's business associates, and maintaining the perfect facade that came with being married to Riverside Valley's most successful marine insurance investigator. The morning routine had become a careful dance around Mark's increasingly secretive behavior. He would emerge from his home office looking haggard, claiming he'd been up late reviewing case files, but I'd stopped believing that explanation weeks ago. The man who used to share every detail of his day now spoke in vague generalities about complex claims and unusual circumstances. His laptop, once carelessly left open around the house, was now password protected and never left unattended. Tyler noticed it too. At 15, our son had inherited Mark's analytical mind and wasn't easily fooled. "Dad's acting weird," he mentioned one evening while helping me load the dishwasher. "He keeps asking me about my swimming times and whether I ever swim alone in the lake. It's like he's conducting some kind of interview." I had brushed off Tyler's concerns, attributing Mark's behavior to work stress, but the comment planted a seed of unease that grew stronger each day. Chloe, 12 and still young enough to seek comfort when confused, had started having nightmares about drowning. She would wake up crying, talking about dark water and not being able to breathe, begging me to promise she wouldn't have to go on the boat anymore. Mark's response to her fears was oddly clinical, almost detached, as if he were analyzing her symptoms rather than comforting his frightened daughter. The first real warning sign came during what should have been a routine family dinner at the Lakeside Country Club. Mark had been unusually attentive, asking detailed questions about my swimming abilities, my comfort level in deep water, and whether I ever felt dizzy or disoriented when we were out on the boat. His questions felt more like an interrogation than casual conversation. each query delivered with the same systematic approach he used when investigating insurance claims. "You know, honey," he said, cutting his steak with unusual precision, "I've been thinking we should take the boat out more often, just the two of us. The kids are getting so busy with their activities, and we never have alone time anymore." The suggestion should have sounded romantic, but something in his tone made my skin crawl. When I mentioned that October water was getting too cold for comfortable boating, his response was immediate and specific. "The water temperature is still manageable. According to the Coast Guard data, hypothermia doesn't set in for at least 20 to 30 minutes in 50-degree water." Why would my husband know the exact timeline for hypothermia in October lake water? The question haunted me for days, growing more disturbing as I replayed the conversation. Mark had always been knowledgeable about water safety due to his profession, but this felt different. This felt calculated. My sister Nicole had been warning me about changes in Mark's behavior for months, but I'd dismissed her concerns as the cynicism of someone who'd gone through a bitter divorce herself. "Rachel, he's different," she insisted during one of our weekly phone calls. "Remember when Mark used to laugh? When was the last time you heard him genuinely laugh?" I couldn't answer her question because I couldn't remember. The social dynamics in our circle had shifted too. Mark's business partner, James Mitchell, seemed uncomfortable around me lately, avoiding eye contact during social gatherings and cutting conversations short when I approached. Ashley Parker, the new claims adjuster Mark had hired 6 months ago, appeared at every company function now, always positioned near Mark, always ready with research or files he might need. She was beautiful in that polished, professional way that made other wives notice, with platinum blonde hair and the kind of figure that looked perfect in the tailored business suits she favored. I told myself I wasn't jealous. Mark had never given me reason to doubt his fidelity, and Ashley seemed completely focused on her career. But there was something about the way they communicated in looks and abbreviated conversations that suggested a deeper understanding than typical employer-employee relationships. When I mentioned Ashley during dinner conversation, Mark's defenses would go up immediately, praising her analytical skills and dedication to the company with an enthusiasm that felt excessive. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in Dautzy Setai, mid-September. I was in the kitchen preparing Tyler's favorite spaghetti sauce when I heard Mark on a phone call in his office, his voice carrying through the partially open door. The conversation was too quiet to make out individual words, but the tone was urgent, almost conspiratorial. When he emerged 20 minutes later, he announced that he needed to work late again, the third night that week. After he left, claiming to meet with a client about a complicated boat accident claim, I found myself standing in his office doorway, staring at the desk where he spent increasingly long hours. The room smelled like his cologne mixed with the anxiety sweat that had become his constant companion. His desktop was clear except for a single manila folder marked "Confidential Client Files" and a stack of marine safety brochures that seemed oddly out of place for someone with his expertise. That night, as I lay awake listening to Mark's restless tossing beside me, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find out what was really happening to my husband, my marriage, and my family. The man sleeping next to me had become a stranger, and strangers, I was beginning to understand, could be dangerous. The next morning brought unseasonably warm weather for late September, the kind of Indian summer day that draws people to the lake despite the approaching autumn. Mark was more animated than he'd been in weeks, suggesting we take the boat out for what he called, probably our last good day on the water this season. His enthusiasm felt forced, artificial, like an actor overplaying a role. As we prepared the boat, Mark was unusually attentive to details that had never concerned him before. He checked the life vest compartment multiple times, adjusted the radio equipment, and spent an unusual amount of time examining the engine. When I asked if everything was all right, he assured me he was just being thorough, but his movements had the precision of someone following a checklist rather than performing routine maintenance. Tyler and Chloe were spending the day with friends, leaving just Mark and me for the boat trip. As we pulled away from our private dock, I noticed Ashley Parker's car in the parking area of the public boat launch across the bay. When I pointed it out to Mark, he glanced over casually and claimed he hadn't noticed her vehicle. But I caught him checking his watch repeatedly and looking toward shore with the focused attention of someone expecting a signal. We anchored in the deepest part of Clearwater Lake, far from other boats, in a spot Mark claimed was perfect for the late afternoon light. The water was crystal clear, dropping to over 100 feet in this section of the lake, with rocky sides that would make swimming back to shore challenging even for a strong swimmer. Mark suggested we have some wine to celebrate our last boat trip of the season, producing a bottle of my favorite Chardonnay from the cooler, along with 2 glasses. As he poured the wine, I noticed his hands were trembling slightly, and he kept glancing at his watch as if timing something. The wine tasted slightly bitter, different from the usual crisp flavor I expected, but Mark assured me it was just a different vintage when I mentioned it. Within minutes, I felt dizzy and disoriented, my vision becoming fuzzy around the edges. "I think I need to sit down," I managed to say, gripping the side of the boat for support. Mark's response was immediate and strangely prepared. "You're probably just dehydrated. Why don't you lean over the side and splash some cool water on your face?" His suggestion made no sense. If I was dehydrated, cold lake water on my face wouldn't help, and leaning over the side of a boat while dizzy was dangerous. But Mark was already moving behind me, his hands reaching toward my shoulders. Something primitive and instinctual kicked in at that moment. Despite the dizziness, I pulled away from Mark's hands and stumbled toward the captain's chair, putting the boat's console between us. "I think we should head back," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fear that was beginning to override the drug-induced confusion. Mark's expression shifted then, the mask of concern dropping for just a moment to reveal something cold and calculating underneath. "We're already out here," he said, his voice losing the gentle tone he'd maintained all day. "And you really should cool off in the water. The temperature is perfect for swimming." He moved toward me again, more purposefully this time, no longer pretending his intentions were innocent. That was when I understood with crystal clarity that my husband had brought me to the deepest part of Clearwater Lake to kill me, and Ashley Parker was positioned on shore to serve as his alibi witness to a tragic boating accident. The dizziness from whatever he'd put in my wine was intensifying, my coordination deteriorating by the minute. But my mind was clear enough to recognize the trap I'd walked into. I had to get back to shore, back to my children, back to safety. But first, I had to survive the next few minutes with a man who had transformed from the husband I'd trusted for 12 years into someone capable of murder. The boat rocked gently. In the afternoon breeze, the same soothing motion that had comforted me on hundreds of previous trips, now feeling like the rhythm of a countdown to disaster. As Mark advanced toward me with renewed determination, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and my husband had been carefully constructed lies. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The question now was whether I would live long enough to discover the truth and expose the man who had been planning my death while sleeping beside me every night. I managed to grab the boat's radio while Mark was momentarily distracted by a fishing boat that appeared on the horizon. My hands shook as I called for assistance, claiming engine trouble rather than revealing the true emergency. The presence of other people on the water seemed to shift something in Mark's demeanor, and he reluctantly started the engine to head back to shore, his jaw clenched in frustration that his plan had been interrupted. The ride back to our dock was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Mark maintained a facade of concern about my dizziness, but I could feel his eyes calculating, already formulating his next move. As we tied up the boat, he helped me to the house with exaggerated care, asking repeatedly if I needed medical attention, I declined, claiming I just needed rest, but internally I was planning my next steps with the clarity that comes from surviving a murder attempt. That evening, after Mark left for another mysterious late meeting, I sat in our bedroom trying to process what had happened. My husband of 12 years had attempted to drug me and stage my drowning as a boating accident. The man who had held my hand during Tyler's difficult birth, who had stayed up all night with Chloe when she had pneumonia, who had built what I thought was a loving family with me, had planned my death with the same methodical approach he used for everything else in his life. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the boat rocking beneath me and Mark's hands reaching for my shoulders. By dawn, I had made two crucial decisions. I needed professional help, and I needed to gather evidence before Mark realized his plan had failed and tried again. The next attempt might not be interrupted by passing fishing boats. Diana Walsh came highly recommended by Nicole's divorce attorney. Her office in downtown Riverside Valley occupied the top floor of a converted Victorian mansion, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Cascade Mountains. Diana herself was in her 50s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with the kind of presence that suggested she'd seen every variation of marital deception and had strategies for all of them. "Mrs. Thompson," she said after I'd finished explaining the boat incident, "what you're describing isn't just grounds for divorce. It's attempted murder. Have you contacted the police?" When I explained my concerns about proving what had happened, she leaned back in her leather chair and studied me with the focused attention of someone solving a complex puzzle. "Your husband specializes in marine insurance claims," she said slowly. "He would know exactly how to stage a drowning that looked accidental. He would also know how insurance investigations work, what evidence would be examined, and how to avoid leaving traces that would raise suspicions." She pulled out a legal pad and began taking notes. "We need to assume he's planning to try again, and we need to be smarter than he is." Diana's first instruction was to document everything but carefully. "Don't let him know you suspect anything. If he realizes you're onto him, he might escalate or disappear entirely. We need to catch him in the planning stages." She recommended a private investigator she'd worked with before, Carlos Vega, who specialized in insurance fraud cases. "If your husband is planning insurance fraud through your death, Carlos will find the evidence." The performance of normalcy became my new, full-time job. I cooked Mark's favorite meals, discussed Tyler's college applications, helped Chloe with her school projects, and acted like the devoted wife I'd been for 12 years. But underneath the routine, I was watching everything with new eyes. Mark's phone calls became suspicious conversations. His late nights at the office transformed into opportunities to gather evidence. His affectionate gestures felt like reconnaissance for his next attempt. Carlos Vega looked nothing like the private investigators in movies. He was a slight man in his 40s with wire-rimmed glasses and the appearance of an accountant, which served him well in his line of work. People overlooked him, dismissed him as harmless, and often revealed more than they intended in his presence. His background in insurance investigation made him the perfect choice for unraveling Mark's scheme. "Marine insurance fraud is more common than people realize," Carlos explained during our first meeting at a coffee shop 30 miles from Riverside Valley. "Water destroys evidence, accidents can look natural, and life insurance policies pay out quickly if there's no suspicion of foul play." He'd brought a thick folder of case studies, each one more disturbing than the last. "Your husband's expertise would make him very good at this kind of crime." Carlos's investigation strategy was methodical and comprehensive. He would monitor Mark's activities, track his communications, and investigate any recent changes to insurance policies or financial accounts. "Men who plan their wives' deaths usually leave a paper trail," he assured me. "They can't resist setting up the financial benefits that justify their actions." Meanwhile, I conducted my own investigation within our home. Mark's office became my primary target during his increasingly frequent absences. The manila folder marked "Confidential Client Files" contained copies of dozens of drowning accident, reports from across the Pacific Northwest, each one meticulously annotated in Mark's handwriting. The margins contained notes about water temperature, survival times, and the effectiveness of different types of accidents in avoiding insurance investigation. One report particularly chilled me. A woman in Washington had drowned during a sunset boat trip with her husband, who claimed she'd had too much wine and fallen overboard while he was checking the anchor. The insurance investigation had concluded that alcohol impairment contributed to an accidental drowning, and the life insurance policy paid out within 60 days. Mark's notes in the margin read, "Perfect scenario. Wine explains disorientation. Deep water prevents body recovery for several days, allowing alcohol to dissipate. Husband appears cooperative and grief-stricken." The marine safety brochures. On Mark's desk weren't random educational materials. They were research documents focusing specifically on drowning prevention and accident statistics. One brochure about hypothermia in cold water was highlighted extensively, with particular attention to the section explaining how quickly someone could lose consciousness in 50-degree water. Another pamphlet about boat safety had detailed notes about which types of accidents appeared most credible to insurance investigators. Hidden in the back of Mark's desk drawer, I found a small notebook filled with what appeared to be timeline planning. The entries were cryptic, but terrifying in their implications. R swimming ability, strong but not competitive level. Wine tolerance, moderate. Best location, north end past marker buoys. Optimal conditions, late afternoon, few boats, moderate chop. The clinical analysis of my own vulnerabilities, written in my husband's familiar handwriting, was more disturbing than any horror novel. Carlos's surveillance revealed that Mark's late-night meetings weren't with clients. He was spending time with Ashley Parker, but their relationship wasn't romantic in the traditional sense. They were business partners in something far more sinister than an extramarital affair. Ashley's role at Thompson Marine Insurance wasn't just processing claims. She was helping Mark identify potential targets and create opportunities for profitable accidents. "Your husband isn't having an affair," Carlos reported during our second meeting. "He's running an operation. Ashley Parker helps him identify wealthy clients with substantial life insurance policies who might be vulnerable to staged accidents. She creates documentation that supports accidental death claims, and your husband uses his expertise to make the deaths look convincing." The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Carlos had identified at least 6 suspicious drowning deaths over the past 3 years, all involving Thompson Marine Insurance clients, all occurring under circumstances that benefited someone financially. Mark hadn't just planned my death. He'd been practicing on other victims, perfecting his technique while building a successful murder-for-profit business. Ashley's background check revealed additional disturbing information. She'd worked for 3 different insurance companies in 5 years, leaving each position under circumstances that weren't entirely clear. Her financial records showed deposits that didn't match her declared income, suggesting she was being paid for services beyond her official job description. Most troubling, she'd purchased a new BMW and moved to an expensive lakefront condo just 6 months after joining Thompson. Marine insurance, improvements that her salary couldn't support. The life insurance policy I'd discovered was even more damaging than I'd initially realized. Mark had increased my coverage to $3 million just 8 months ago, claiming it was a smart financial planning move given his business success. He'd also added an accidental death clause that would double the payout to $6 million if I died in an accident. The premium increases were paid from Thompson Marine Insurance business accounts, not our personal finances, suggesting he viewed my death as a business investment. Carlos uncovered the existence of offshore accounts connected to both Mark and Ashley, accounts that had received substantial deposits following several of the suspicious drowning deaths he'd identified. The money trail wasn't complete yet, but the pattern was clear. Mark had been profiting from staged accidents for years, and my death was intended to be his biggest payday yet. The most chilling discovery came when Carlos accessed Ashley's computer files through methods he didn't explain in detail. She'd created comprehensive dossiers on multiple Thompson Marine Insurance clients, including detailed analyses of their personal habits, financial situations, and vulnerability factors. My file was the most extensive, containing observations about my daily routines, social activities, and physical capabilities that could only have been gathered through extensive surveillance. Ashley's notes about me were clinical and calculating. Target maintains regular exercise routine but no competitive swimming background. Social drinker with documented wine preferences. Trusting personality type unlikely to suspect spousal involvement. Strong maternal instincts could be exploited through child-related distractions. Optimal elimination window. Children at school, not activities. Limited witness availability. Reading my own death planned in such methodical detail was surreal and terrifying. These people had been watching me, studying me, preparing for my murder with the same attention to detail that Mark applied to legitimate insurance investigations. I was a file in their system, a problem to be solved, a profit opportunity to be maximized. The evidence was overwhelming, but Carlos warned me that gathering it legally for criminal prosecution would require more time and careful coordination with law enforcement. We need to catch them actively planning or attempting another crime, he explained. What we have now proves conspiracy, but prosecutors prefer cases where they can demonstrate immediate criminal intent. That's when Diana Walsh suggested a controlled operation designed to capture Mark and Ashley in the act of planning my death. The plan would require me to continue acting normally while creating opportunities for them to incriminate themselves through recorded conversations and documented actions. It was dangerous, requiring me to potentially put myself at risk again, but it was the most effective way to ensure they faced criminal charges rather than just divorce court. The psychological toll of living with someone who wanted me dead while pretending everything was normal was exhausting. Every meal Mark prepared might be drugged. Every suggestion for a romantic evening might be a murder attempt. Every affectionate gesture might be manipulation designed to lower my guard. I started eating only food I'd prepared myself, declining wine or drinks Mark offered, and avoiding situations where I'd be alone with him in isolated locations. Tyler and Chloe sensed the tension, even though I tried to shield them from the truth. Tyler asked pointed questions about why I'd suddenly become reluctant to go out on the boat, and Chloe noticed that I no longer wore the jewelry Mark gave me, or seemed genuinely happy when he returned from his business trips. Maintaining the facade of a normal family while planning to expose their father as a serial killer required acting skills I didn't know I possessed. The hardest part was the intimate moments when my guard was down and I remembered the man I'd fallen in love with 12 years ago. Mark still looked like the person who'd proposed to me on this same lake, still had the same laugh when something genuinely amused him, still reached for my hand automatically when we walked together. The cognitive dissonance between those memories and the reality of what he'd become was mentally exhausting. But those moments of nostalgia were quickly replaced by the cold reality of the evidence Carlos continued to uncover. Mark hadn't become a killer overnight. He'd been developing this criminal enterprise for years, probably long before I'd noticed any changes in his behavior. The man I'd thought I married might never have existed at all, just another carefully constructed facade designed to support his real business interests. As October approached and the lake water grew colder, Mark began suggesting more boat trips, with increasing urgency. He claimed he wanted to take advantage of the beautiful autumn weather before winter set in, but I recognized the pressure of someone working against a deadline. Whatever timetable he'd established for my death was approaching, and his window of opportunity was closing as the boating season ended. Diana Walsh and Carlos Vega were ready to implement their plan to capture Mark and Ashley in criminal activity, but success would require perfect timing and flawless execution. One mistake could result in my actual death rather than just gathering evidence of planned murder. The stakes couldn't be higher, and the margin for error was essentially zero. The stage was set for a confrontation that would either expose Mark's criminal enterprise and save my life, or provide him with the perfect Opportunity to complete what he'd started on that terrifying afternoon when I'd nearly become another one of his successful insurance claims. The breakthrough came through an unexpected source. Tom Anderson, a former Thompson Marine Insurance employee who'd been quietly let go 6 months earlier, contacted Carlos after hearing through industry connections that someone was investigating the company. Tom had been Mark's senior claims adjuster for 8 years before Ashley Parker arrived and systematically undermined his position within the organization. I started noticing patterns that didn't make sense, Tom explained during our clandestine meeting at a truck stop diner outside Eugene. His weathered hands wrapped around a coffee mug as he spoke in the low, careful tones of someone who'd been carrying dangerous knowledge for months. Claims that should have triggered fraud investigations were being fast-tracked for payment. Accidents with suspicious circumstances were being classified as routine. When I raised questions, Mark told me I was becoming paranoid and needed to trust his expertise. Tom had kept copies of case files that troubled him, a violation of company policy that could have cost him his career. But his instincts about the irregularities had been correct, and his documentation provided the missing pieces Carlos needed to understand the full scope of Mark's operation. The files revealed a sophisticated network of corruption that extended far beyond Thompson Marine Insurance into the broader Pacific Northwest marine insurance industry. Ashley Parker didn't just help process claims, Tom continued, pulling a thick manila envelope from his jacket. She had connections with medical examiners, Coast Guard investigators, and local law enforcement officials who could influence how accident scenes were processed. She knew which corners could be cut, which evidence might be overlooked, and which officials might be willing to expedite investigations for the right compensation. The documents Tom provided were explosive. Medical examiner reports that minimized suspicious circumstances. Coast Guard incident reports that failed to mention evidence of foul play. Police investigations that concluded accidental death without exploring alternative explanations. Ashley had systematically corrupted the entire chain of official oversight that should have prevented exactly the kind of crimes Mark was committing. One case file particularly stood out. Janet Morrison, a 42-year-old widow from Portland, had died in a kayaking accident on the Columbia River 8 months ago. The official investigation concluded she'd been overcome by unexpected rapids, despite being an experienced kayaker. Her life insurance policy had paid out too, $8 million to her business partner, who'd been struggling financially before her convenient death. Tom's notes revealed details that hadn't made it into the official reports. Janet had discovered financial irregularities in their shared business just weeks before her death. She'd contacted an attorney about dissolving the partnership and had scheduled a meeting with an accountant to audit their books. The business partner, coincidentally, was a Thompson Marine Insurance client who'd been consulting with Mark about upgrading his own life insurance coverage. Mark didn't just kill for money, Tom explained, his voice dropping even lower. He provided a service to clients who had their own problems to solve. Inconvenient business partners, estranged spouses with too much knowledge about financial crimes, family members who might inherit money they couldn't access otherwise. Ashley helped identify potential clients who might benefit from this kind of problem solving, and Mark provided the expertise to make their problems disappear. The revelation that my husband was essentially running a murder-for-hire business, disguised as an insurance company, was staggering. This wasn't just about my life insurance policy or Mark's desire to start fresh with Ashley. I was potentially the latest victim in a serial killing operation that had been claiming lives across the region for years. Carlos cross-referenced Tom's files with his own research and identified 12 suspicious deaths that fit the pattern. All were Thompson Marine Insurance clients or their family members. All involved water-related accidents that occurred under circumstances beneficial to someone else. All had life insurance policies that paid out quickly without extensive investigation. The statistical likelihood of so many accidental deaths among clients of a single insurance company was virtually impossible. Diana Walsh immediately contacted Agent Lisa Kane, a federal investigator who specialized in insurance fraud and organized crime. The scope of Mark's operation had expanded beyond local jurisdiction into federal territory, requiring resources and authority that local law enforcement couldn't provide. Agent Kane's preliminary review of the evidence confirmed our worst fears. Mark and Ashley were operating one of the most sophisticated murder-for-profit schemes the FBI had encountered. We need to catch them in the act of planning or committing a crime, Agent Kane explained during a secure meeting at the federal building in Portland. What you've uncovered is compelling circumstantial evidence, but we need proof of active criminal conspiracy to build a case that will hold up in court. She outlined a plan that would require my cooperation in what essentially amounted to an undercover operation using myself as bait. The strategy was terrifyingly simple. I would create an opportunity for Mark to attempt my murder while federal agents monitored every aspect of the situation. Hidden cameras and recording devices would capture his actions and conversations. Undercover agents would be positioned to intervene if the situation became genuinely dangerous. The goal was to record Mark actually attempting to kill me while gathering evidence of the broader conspiracy. Agent Kane assured me that my safety was the top priority, but we all understood the risks involved. Mark was an expert at staging accidents that looked convincing even under professional investigation. If something went wrong, if the timing was off by even a few seconds, I could become an actual victim rather than a cooperating witness. The margin for error was impossibly thin. The plan required perfect coordination between multiple agencies and flawless execution of every detail. Hidden surveillance equipment had to be installed without Mark's knowledge. Undercover agents needed to be positioned where they could respond quickly, but wouldn't be noticed by someone with Mark's investigative experience. Communication systems had to work reliably in remote locations where cell phone coverage might be spotty. Most challenging was maintaining my psychological composure while living with someone I now knew was planning my death. The stress of constant vigilance was wearing me down, affecting my sleep, my appetite, and my ability to interact normally with Tyler and Chloe. They could sense something was wrong despite my efforts to shield them from the truth. Tyler confronted me directly one evening after Mark had left for another mysterious late meeting. "Mom, what's really going on?" he asked, his 15-year-old directness cutting through my careful evasions. "Dad's acting like a stranger? You're nervous all the time? And everyone's pretending everything is normal when it obviously isn't." His maturity forced me to provide at least a partial explanation without revealing the full danger we were facing. "Your father and I are having some serious problems," I told him carefully. "I can't explain everything right now, but I need you to trust me and help keep Chloe safe until we get things sorted out." Tyler's expression told me he understood more than I was saying, and his immediate agreement to help protect his sister confirmed that he sensed the gravity of our situation. Chloe's nightmares about drowning had intensified, occurring almost nightly now. Her 12-year-old subconscious seemed to be picking up on dangers her conscious mind couldn't identify. I started sleeping in her room, officially to comfort her, but actually to ensure Mark couldn't access either of my children without my knowledge. The psychological impact on both kids was becoming severe, adding urgency to our need to resolve the situation quickly. Agent Kane's technical team installed surveillance equipment throughout our house with remarkable stealth, placing cameras and microphones in locations that would capture Mark's activities without being detected. They accessed our property while Mark was at work, and I was running errands, completing the installation in less than 4 hours. The devices were so well hidden that I couldn't identify them even knowing their approximate locations. The most sophisticated equipment was installed on our boat, where Mark would most likely attempt to stage my death. Waterproof cameras were hidden in the navigation console, under seating areas, and within the life jacket compartments. Audio recording devices were embedded in locations that would capture conversations even over engine noise and wind. GPS tracking. Systems would monitor our exact location and movement patterns. Carlos Vega's role shifted from investigation to active surveillance. He would monitor Mark's activities in real time, tracking his movements and communications to predict when the murder attempt might occur. Hidden cameras in Mark's office at Thompson Marine Insurance captured his interactions with Ashley and their planning sessions for what they believed would be the perfect crime. The audio surveillance revealed conversations that were both incriminating and chilling. Mark and Ashley discussed my murder with the same professional detachment they might use to analyze a legitimate insurance claim. They reviewed weather patterns to identify optimal conditions, studied boat traffic patterns to find times when fewer witnesses would be present, and refined their timeline to maximize the probability of success. Rachel's been avoiding boat trips lately, Mark told Ashley during one recorded conversation. She's getting suspicious, so we need to force the issue before she becomes completely uncooperative. Ashley suggested creating a family emergency that would require us to take the boat, perhaps claiming that Tyler had been injured while hiking on the far side of the lake and needed immediate rescue. The casual cruelty of using my maternal instincts against me, potentially endangering Tyler in the process, demonstrated how completely Mark had abandoned any lingering emotional connection to our family. We weren't people anymore. We were obstacles, to be removed or tools to be manipulated in service of his criminal enterprise. Agent Kane's team identified the optimal window for the operation based on Mark's planning conversations and behavior patterns. The next warm weekend would likely be his final opportunity before cold weather ended the boating season permanently. His increasing agitation suggested he was feeling pressure to act soon, making him more likely to take risks that would provide the evidence needed for prosecution. The psychological preparation for potentially witnessing my husband attempt to murder me while staying calm enough to gather evidence was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Agent Kane arranged for counseling support and stress management training, but no amount of preparation could fully ready someone for such an unnatural situation. I practiced breathing techniques and visualization exercises designed to help me maintain composure under extreme stress. Diana Walsh prepared legal documentation that would immediately freeze Mark's assets and establish emergency custody arrangements for Tyler and Chloe once arrests were made. The children would stay with my sister Nicole during the initial investigation and trial proceedings, protecting them from media attention and ensuring their emotional well-being during what would undoubtedly be a traumatic period. Tom Anderson agreed to testify about the patterns he'd observed and the evidence he'd preserved, despite knowing that his cooperation would likely end his career in the insurance industry. His willingness to sacrifice his professional future to stop Mark's killing spree demonstrated a moral courage that provided strength during my darkest moments of doubt about proceeding with such a dangerous plan. The final pieces of the operation fell into place as Mark's behavior became increasingly erratic. He'd started making mistakes in his regular business operations, losing focus on legitimate claims while obsessing over the details of my planned murder. Ashley was struggling to cover for his declining performance, and several clients had complained about delayed claim processing and unprofessional service. Mark's physical appearance reflected the stress of planning murder while maintaining a normal facade. He'd lost weight, developed dark circles under his eyes, and started drinking more heavily in the evenings. His sleep was restless and frequently interrupted by nightmares that he claimed were work-related stress dreams. The man who'd once been meticulous about his appearance and professional reputation was becoming visibly unstable. Agent Kane made a final assessment of our readiness and declared the operation ready to proceed. All surveillance equipment was functioning properly, backup communication systems were tested and operational, and response teams were briefed on their specific roles and positioning. The weather forecast showed optimal conditions for the coming weekend, with clear skies and calm winds that would encourage boating activity. The stage was set for a confrontation that would either expose Mark's criminal enterprise and end his killing spree, or result in my death despite all the precautions and planning. There was no middle ground, no possibility of partially successful outcomes. Either the operation would succeed completely, or it would fail catastrophically. As I prepared for what might be my final weekend as Mark's unsuspecting wife, I tried to focus on the future beyond this nightmare. Tyler and Chloe deserved to grow up without the shadow of their father's crimes hanging over their lives. The other families affected by Mark's murders deserved justice for their lost loved ones. And somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, there were probably other potential victims who could be saved if Mark's operation was shut down permanently. The weight of responsibility was enormous, but so was the opportunity to prevent future tragedies and bring closure to past crimes. Whatever happened in the next few days would determine not just my fate, but the fate of everyone whose lives had been touched by Mark's murderous conspiracy. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of pristine October weather that makes the Pacific Northwest famous. Crystal clear skies stretched endlessly over Clearwater Lake, and the autumn air carried just enough crispness to make the anticipated warmth of afternoon sunshine feel like a gift. Mark was up before dawn, moving through the house with an energy I hadn't seen in months, humming while he prepared coffee and checking his phone constantly for weather updates that seemed to exceed his usual interest in meteorological conditions. "Perfect day for one last boat trip," he announced as I entered the kitchen, his smile bright but somehow hollow, like a mask that didn't quite fit properly. Water temperature is still manageable, no wind predicted until evening, and the lake should be relatively empty since most people think boating season is over. His enthusiasm felt rehearsed, each word carefully chosen to seem natural while serving a darker purpose. Tyler was spending the day at a friend's house working on a school project, and Chloe had been invited to a sleepover that would keep her away until Sunday evening. The convenient absence of both children from what Mark had planned as our final boat trip together wasn't coincidental. Agent Kane's team had subtly arranged both invitations through their parents, ensuring my children would be safe and providing alibis that placed them far from any potential crime scene. As Mark prepared the boat with unusual attention to detail, I followed the prearranged protocol for activating the surveillance equipment. A simple text message to a number I'd memorized alerted Agent Kane's team that the operation was beginning. Hidden cameras throughout our property began recording every movement and conversation, while GPS tracking systems started monitoring our exact location in real time. Mark's preparations were methodical and telling. He spent considerable time checking the engine, not for maintenance purposes, but to ensure it would start reliably when needed for his escape. He adjusted the radio equipment, testing different frequencies and range capabilities. Most ominously, he removed the emergency flares from their usual storage compartment, claiming they were expired and needed replacement. But I suspected he was eliminating tools I might use to signal for help. The life jacket situation was particularly revealing. Mark had always been casual about life jacket use, considering them unnecessary for strong swimmers on calm days. But today he insisted I wear one, claiming new Coast Guard regulations required it for all passengers. The jacket he selected for me was different from my usual one, slightly larger and less buoyant, the kind that might fail to keep someone afloat if they were unconscious or struggling in cold water. Ashley Parker's car was already visible at the public boat launch when we left our private dock, positioned with a clear view of the lake, but far enough away to maintain plausible deniability. She appeared to be reading a book, just another person enjoying the beautiful weather, but her presence confirmed that the plan was proceeding as Mark had envisioned. Her role as witness to a tragic accident was about to begin. As we motored toward the deeper sections of Clearwater Lake, Mark's conversation became increasingly strange. He asked detailed questions about my swimming endurance, how long I thought I could tread water in cool temperatures, and whether I'd ever experienced panic in deep water. His inquiries felt like a final assessment, gathering information that might be relevant to staging a convincing drowning. "You know, honey," he said as we approached the area where he'd attempted to kill me weeks earlier, "I've been thinking about our future a lot lately, about changes that might be coming, opportunities for new beginnings." His tone was reflective, almost philosophical, but underneath I detected the cold calculation of someone preparing to commit murder. The boat slowed as we reached the deepest part of the lake, far from shore and isolated from other watercraft. Mark anchored us in the exact spot where his previous attempt had been interrupted, clearly believing that familiar territory would increase his chances of success. The water beneath us dropped to over 120 feet, deep enough to delay body recovery and complicate any subsequent investigation. Mark produced a bottle of champagne from the cooler, claiming we should celebrate our last boat trip of the season before winter weather made lake activities impossible. The champagne was expensive, a vintage we'd shared on our wedding anniversary years ago, but I knew it contained more than alcohol. His insistence that we toast to new adventures and fresh starts felt like a eulogy delivered before the funeral. Agent Kane had prepared me for this moment, providing a small device that would neutralize most common drugs while appearing to be an ordinary antacid tablet. I palmed the device while pretending to admire the champagne label, then discreetly activated it when Mark turned to adjust the anchor line. The bitter taste that followed suggested his champagne contained a significant dose of sedatives intended to incapacitate me quickly. Mark's patience seemed shorter this time, his urgency more apparent. He kept checking his watch and scanning the horizon for other boats, clearly working within a specific timeline that required us to be finished and back to shore before conditions changed. His nervous energy was palpable, the tension of someone who'd committed to an irreversible course of action and couldn't tolerate further delays. "Why don't you move to the stern where you can see the mountains better?" he suggested, his voice carrying forced casualness that didn't mask the strategic nature of his request. The stern offered the deepest water access and the greatest distance from safety equipment, positioning me perfectly for what he planned to do next. As I moved toward the back of the boat, Mark followed closely, his movements precise and predatory. The relaxed husband enjoying a peaceful afternoon had been replaced by someone calculating angles and timing with professional efficiency. His hands hung at his sides but remained ready, his posture suggesting someone prepared to act quickly when the opportunity presented itself. The moment of truth arrived when Mark suggested I lean over the side to photograph some interesting rock formations visible beneath the crystal-clear water. His directions were specific, requiring me to position myself precariously over the deepest section of the lake while he positioned himself behind me. The setup was identical to his previous attempt, refined based on lessons learned from that interrupted effort. "The light is perfect right now," he urged, moving closer as I hesitated near the boat's edge. "You'll never get another shot like this once the weather changes." His insistence carried an undertone of threat, suggesting that cooperation wasn't really optional and resistance might trigger immediate violence rather than the planned accident scenario. This time I was ready for his attack. Agent Kane's team had trained me in defensive techniques designed to create opportunities for intervention, while maximizing the evidence captured by surveillance equipment. When Mark's hands reached for my shoulders to push me overboard, I shifted my weight and grabbed the boat's railing, turning his momentum against him while ensuring the hidden cameras recorded his clear intent to commit murder. "What are you doing?" I demanded loudly, my voice carrying across the water to ensure any audio surveillance would capture Mark's response. His expression shifted from confident predator to confused frustration as his carefully planned attack failed to achieve its intended result. The mask of loving husband finally dropped completely, revealing the cold killer underneath. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Mark snarled, abandoning all pretense of accident as he lunged toward me again. This time, his intent was unmistakably murderous, his hands reaching for my throat rather than attempting to stage a drowning. The surveillance equipment was capturing everything, but I still needed to survive long enough for intervention to arrive. The physical struggle that followed was brief, but intense. Mark's surprise at my resistance gave me crucial seconds to activate the emergency beacon Agent Kane had hidden in my life jacket. The device would immediately alert response teams to our exact location while transmitting live audio of everything happening on the boat. Mark's threats and attempts at violence were being recorded in real time, providing undeniable evidence of his criminal intent. Coast Guard vessels appeared on the horizon faster than Mark thought possible, their rapid response confirming his suspicion that something wasn't proceeding according to plan. His confident demeanor crumbled as he realized the trap closing around him, replaced by the desperate panic of someone recognizing that years of careful planning were collapsing in real time. "You set me up," he accused, his voice filled with rage and disbelief. "How long have you known?" His questions revealed the depth of his narcissistic assumption that his crimes had been perfectly concealed, that his wife would never be intelligent or resourceful enough to expose his activities. The Coast Guard boarding was swift and professional, with officers taking Mark into custody while ensuring my safety and securing the boat as a crime scene. Every word of his angry protests was recorded, including his demands to speak with Ashley, and his threats about consequences I would face for interfering with his business operations. His complete lack of remorse or recognition of wrongdoing was chilling, even after everything I'd learned about his criminal activities. Ashley Parker's arrest at the boat launch occurred simultaneously, coordinated to prevent either conspirator from warning others involved in their network. Agent Kane's team had been monitoring her communications throughout the operation, ensuring that no signals could be sent to Confederates who might destroy evidence or flee the jurisdiction. Her shocked reaction to being taken into custody suggested she'd believed their operation was too sophisticated to be detected by law enforcement. The immediate aftermath was surreal. Federal agents swarmed our property, executing search warrants that had been prepared in advance and ready for implementation the moment Mark's criminal intent was conclusively demonstrated. Thompson Marine Insurance was sealed as a crime scene, with forensic accountants beginning the complex process of tracing financial transactions connected to multiple murders across several states. Mark's complete psychological breakdown during questioning provided investigators with a wealth of information about his criminal network and methods. His narcissistic personality couldn't tolerate the collapse of what he considered his masterpiece of criminal enterprise, and his angry explanations of how his victims had deserved their fates revealed details that might otherwise have taken months to uncover through traditional investigation. The scope of evidence recovered from Mark's office and computer systems exceeded even Agent Kane's expectations. Detailed files on dozens of potential victims, financial records tracking profits from successful murders, and communication logs revealing the extent of corruption within various oversight agencies painted a picture of criminal enterprise that had operated successfully for nearly 5 years. Ashley's cooperation with investigators began almost immediately, as she realized the futility of maintaining loyalty to someone who would inevitably blame her for any failures in their operation. Her insider knowledge of which officials had been corrupted and how the murder schemes had been concealed proved invaluable in building cases against other participants in the conspiracy. The media attention was overwhelming and immediate. The story of a suburban wife uncovering her husband's murder-for-hire business, disguised as an insurance company, captured national headlines and sparked investigations into similar suspicious patterns in insurance industries across the country. The phrase "drowning statistics" became shorthand for the meticulous planning that characterized Mark's crimes. Tyler and Chloe's protection became paramount as reporters and photographers attempted to capture images and interviews related to the case. Nicole's house became their temporary refuge, carefully guarded by federal marshals until the initial bite. Media frenzy subsided and longer-term security arrangements could be established. The children's emotional processing of their father's crimes required extensive professional counseling and careful management of information disclosure. Tyler's maturity helped him understand the necessity of my actions, but Chloe struggled with the reality that the father she'd loved was responsible for multiple deaths and had planned to kill her mother. Agent Kane estimated that Mark's arrest prevented at least 6 additional murders that were in various stages of planning. Files recovered from Thompson Marine Insurance revealed detailed surveillance and preparation for eliminating clients whose life insurance policies would benefit business partners, family members, or other associates willing to pay for Mark's specialized services. The financial recovery process began immediately, with frozen assets being evaluated for distribution to victims' families and restitution for the massive fraud scheme. The $3 million life insurance policy Mark had purchased on my life was seized as evidence of criminal intent, along with the offshore accounts where profits from previous murders had been hidden. Diana Walsh's legal strategy shifted from divorce proceedings to ensuring maximum criminal penalties for Mark and his co-conspirators while protecting my children's interests in what remained of our family assets. The complexity of sorting legitimate business income from criminal profits required extensive forensic accounting that would continue for months. The house where I'd lived unknowingly with a serial killer became too contaminated with memories and media attention to remain our home. Plans began for relocating Tyler, Chloe, and myself to a new community where we could rebuild our lives without constant reminders of the nightmare we'd survived. As Mark sat in federal custody awaiting trial on multiple murder charges, I realized that the careful facade of our perfect life had been hiding horrors beyond my worst nightmares. The boat trips I'd enjoyed, the business success I'd celebrated, the community respect I'd shared had all been built on a foundation of systematic murder and fraud that made every memory suspect and every assumption questionable. The federal courthouse in Portland buzzed with activity as Mark's trial began 6 months later. Media trucks lined the streets outside, their satellite dishes reaching toward gray November skies that seemed fitting for the dark revelations about to be exposed. In testimony, I sat in the front row of the gallery, flanked by Agent Kane and Diana Walsh, preparing to watch my husband of 12 years be prosecuted for operating one of the most sophisticated murder-for-profit schemes in Pacific Northwest history. Mark entered the courtroom in shackles and an orange jumpsuit that starkly contrasted with the expensive suits he'd worn during his years of pretending to be a respectable businessman. His appearance had deteriorated dramatically during his months in custody. The confident, meticulously groomed insurance executive had been replaced by a gaunt, hollow-eyed man who seemed genuinely shocked that his carefully constructed world had collapsed so completely. The prosecution's opening statement laid out a timeline of systematic murder that spanned nearly 5 years and claimed at least 14 victims across 3 states. Each death had been meticulously planned and executed to appear accidental, while benefiting someone willing to pay Mark's substantial fees for problem elimination. The scope of his criminal enterprise exceeded even my worst fears about what I'd unknowingly been living with. Ashley Parker had negotiated a plea agreement in exchange for her complete cooperation with prosecutors. Her testimony provided insider details about how their operation functioned, from initial client recruitment through final payout collection. She described Mark as a criminal mastermind who viewed murder as simply another form of risk management, eliminating human obstacles with the same analytical approach he applied to legitimate insurance investigations. The most chilling testimony came from Tom Anderson, whose documentation had provided the initial breakthrough in understanding Mark's criminal pattern. He described watching Mark transform from a legitimate insurance investigator into someone who seemed to enjoy the intellectual challenge of committing perfect crimes. The gradual corruption had been so subtle that Tom hadn't recognized its significance until after he'd been forced out of the company. Dr. Rebecca Chen, the forensic pathologist who'd re-examined several of Mark's victims after his arrest, testified about evidence of foul play that had been overlooked or deliberately ignored during initial investigations. Bruising patterns consistent with forced drowning, toxicology results that suggested drug impairment, and physical evidence of struggle that hadn't been properly documented, painted a picture of murders disguised as accidents with shocking effectiveness. The financial evidence presented by federal forensic accountants revealed the true scope of Mark's operation. Thompson Marine Insurance had generated over $12 million in illegal profits through murder contracts, money laundering, and insurance fraud over the past 5 years. Mark's personal offshore accounts contained nearly $4 million that could be directly traced to payments for specific murders. Agent Kane's testimony about the undercover operation that led to Mark's arrest provided dramatic evidence of his intent to kill me. Audio recordings of his conversations with Ashley, video surveillance of his actions on the boat, and documentation of his detailed planning created an undeniable record of premeditated murder. The jury listened in horrified silence as they heard Mark discussing my death with the detached professionalism of someone planning a business transaction. Mark's defense attorney attempted to portray him as a man driven to desperate measures by financial pressure and emotional breakdown, but the evidence of systematic planning and multiple victims made such explanations impossible to sustain. The defense's strategy shifted to questioning the reliability of surveillance evidence and Ashley's credibility as a cooperating witness, but the overwhelming documentation made their task virtually hopeless. The victim impact statements were heartbreaking testimonies to lives destroyed by Mark's criminal ambitions. Janet Morrison's teenage daughter described losing her mother just as she was starting her senior year of high school, never understanding why her mother's business partner had seemed so unconcerned about the kayaking accident that ended her life. The Riverside family, whose father had drowned during a supposedly routine fishing trip, shared their confusion about inconsistencies in the official investigation that were finally being explained. My own testimony required me to relive the terrifying boat trip where Mark had attempted to kill me, while describing the gradual realization that the man I'd trusted with my life and my children's welfare was actually a serial killer. The emotional impact of acknowledging how completely I'd been deceived was overwhelming, but the necessity of ensuring Mark faced appropriate consequences gave me strength to continue speaking. Tyler and Chloe were carefully shielded from the trial proceedings, but they couldn't be completely protected from the media coverage that had made our family's trauma a matter of public interest. Tyler, now 16, had developed a maturity beyond his years as he helped his younger sister process the reality that their father was a murderer who had planned to kill their mother. His protective instincts toward Chloe and his determination to help our family heal demonstrated strength that both inspired and broke my heart. Chloe's nightmares about drowning had evolved into broader anxiety about safety and trust that required ongoing therapeutic intervention. At 13, she struggled to understand how someone who had read her bedtime stories and helped with homework could simultaneously be planning murder. Her therapist explained that children of criminals often experience a unique form of trauma, related to the fundamental betrayal of trust by someone who should have been their primary protector. The jury deliberation lasted only 8 hours, a remarkably short time for such a complex case. The foreman's reading of guilty verdicts on all charges created a moment of profound relief mixed with sadness for the life I'd thought we'd had together. Mark showed no visible emotion as the verdicts were read, maintaining the detached demeanor that had characterized his approach to murder throughout his criminal career. Judge Patricia Morrison's sentencing hearing provided an opportunity for additional victim statements and final arguments about appropriate punishment for crimes that had shattered so many families. The prosecution requested life imprisonment without possibility of parole, arguing that Mark's calculated approach to murder and complete lack of remorse made him too dangerous for any possibility of eventual release. Mark's statement to the Yatsusseidi court before sentencing was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the entire trial. Rather than expressing remorse or accepting responsibility, he used his final opportunity to speak as a platform for explaining his philosophy about eliminating problems and maximizing opportunities. His clinical analysis of why each victim had deserved to die demonstrated a complete absence of human empathy that made his crimes even more chilling. The life sentence without parole felt appropriate given the scope of Mark's crimes, but no legal punishment could restore the lives he'd taken or undo the trauma he'd inflicted on countless families. The victims' families expressed satisfaction that justice had been served, but also acknowledged that legal closure couldn't fill the permanent void left by their losses. Ashley Parker received a 25-year sentence in exchange for her cooperation, a punishment that reflected both her essential role in the criminal enterprise and her assistance in exposing its full scope. Her testimony had been crucial in understanding how Mark's operation functioned, but her willingness to participate in multiple murders for financial gain demonstrated a moral corruption that deserved significant consequences. The broader investigation, triggered by Mark's arrest, led to additional prosecutions throughout the Pacific Northwest insurance industry. 3 medical examiners, 2 Coast Guard investigators, and 5 local law enforcement officials were charged with corruption related to their roles in covering up Mark's murders. The systematic nature of the conspiracy revealed institutional failures that required comprehensive reform of oversight procedures. Thompson Marine Insurance was dissolved and its assets liquidated to provide restitution for victims' families. The company's client list was transferred to other agencies with enhanced oversight to ensure that legitimate insurance needs continued to be met while preventing similar criminal enterprises from developing. The industry-wide reforms that followed included mandatory cross-referencing of unusual death patterns and enhanced scrutiny of companies with suspicious claim histories. Nicole's house had become our permanent refuge during the trial proceedings, but the need for long-term stability required us to establish a new home away from the memories and media attention that made remaining in Riverside Valley impossible. We eventually settled in Bellingham, Washington, a college town with enough anonymity to allow Tyler and Chloe to attend school without constant reminders of their father's crimes. The financial settlement from seized assets and life insurance policies provided security for Tyler and Chloe's education and future needs. But money couldn't address the emotional challenges of rebuilding trust and creating new family traditions untainted by association with Mark's crimes. Every family celebration, every achievement, every milestone carried the shadow of recognizing how different our lives might have been if Mark had succeeded in his plans. Tyler's college applications required careful consideration of how his father's notoriety might affect his educational opportunities. Several universities expressed concerns about potential media attention or security issues associated with admitting the son of a notorious serial killer. His academic achievements and personal character ultimately overcame these concerns, but the additional scrutiny was an unfair burden for someone who had already suffered so much trauma. Chloe's social development was complicated by her need to carefully manage information about her family background. Making new friends required navigating questions about why we'd moved to Bellingham and where her father was without revealing details that might lead to uncomfortable recognition or unwanted attention. Her therapist helped develop strategies for maintaining age-appropriate privacy while building healthy relationships. The therapy process for all of us involved learning to separate the genuine love and positive memories from our families early, years from the criminal activity that had been occurring simultaneously. Mark had been capable of authentic affection for his children and moments of genuine partnership in our marriage, even while systematically murdering strangers for profit. The cognitive dissonance of acknowledging both realities required ongoing professional support. Agent Kane maintained contact with our family throughout the recovery process, partly for professional reasons related to ongoing investigations, but also because she'd developed personal investment in our welfare. Her experience with other families affected by criminal trauma provided valuable perspective on healing strategies and realistic expectations for the adjustment process. Diana Walsh's legal expertise proved essential in navigating the complex financial and custody issues that arose during the transition to our new life. Mark's conviction eliminated any possibility of custody disputes, but establishing clear legal guardianship and managing inherited assets required careful documentation to protect the children's interests. The book offers and documentary proposals that followed Mark's conviction created opportunities for financial benefit, but also raised concerns about exploiting family trauma for public entertainment. We ultimately declined most media opportunities, choosing privacy and healing over financial gain or public platform opportunities that might have provided some sense of purpose from our suffering. 1 year after Mark's sentencing, Carlos Vega contacted me with news that his investigation techniques developed during our case had been adopted by insurance fraud investigators nationwide. The patterns he'd identified in Mark's operation were being used to detect similar schemes before they could claim additional victims. Our nightmare had contributed to preventing future tragedies, providing some sense that our suffering had served a greater purpose. The anniversary of Mark's arrest became an unofficial memorial day for his victims, with several families gathering annually to remember their lost loved ones and support each other's ongoing healing process. These connections formed a unique community bound by shared trauma, but committed to honoring their loved ones' memories through advocacy for criminal justice reform and victim support services. Tyler's decision to study criminal justice in college was influenced by his experience with the investigation that exposed his father's crimes. His goal of becoming a federal investigator specializing in white-collar crime represented a constructive channel for processing his family's trauma while potentially preventing similar crimes against other families. His maturity and unique perspective would likely make him particularly effective in recognizing patterns that others might miss. Chloe's interest in marine biology emerged as a positive way to reclaim her relationship with water that had been contaminated by her father's crimes. Her determination to pursue underwater research represented courage in confronting environments that might trigger traumatic memories while creating new associations based on scientific discovery rather than criminal activity. The house on Clearwater Lake remained empty for months after Mark's arrest, eventually being sold at a significant loss due to its association with his crimes. The new owners demolished the existing structure and built a completely different home, effectively erasing the physical location where Mark had planned multiple murders while maintaining the facade of a devoted family man. 3 years after Mark's conviction, I returned to school to complete a master's degree in victim advocacy, transforming my experience with criminal trauma into expertise that could help other families navigate similar ordeals. The program provided both professional development and personal healing, allowing me to process my experiences within a framework of service to others rather than purely personal recovery. The support group I eventually facilitated brought together families affected by various forms of betrayal trauma, from financial fraud to domestic violence to criminal conspiracy. The common thread of having trusted someone who proved dangerous created bonds that transcended the specific details of individual cases while providing practical strategies for rebuilding security and trust. Mark's appellate attempts have been consistently unsuccessful, with higher courts finding no basis for overturning his conviction or reducing his sentence. His current imprisonment at a maximum security federal facility ensures that he will never again have the opportunity to harm innocent people, providing a sense of permanent safety that was essential for our family's complete healing. The last communication I received from Mark was a letter written from prison attempting to justify his actions as necessary business decisions, rather than acknowledging the moral enormity of his crimes. His continued refusal to accept responsibility confirmed that our decision to expose him rather than attempting family reconciliation had been correct, even though it had required tremendous courage and sacrifice. Looking back on the experience, 5 years later, I recognize that discovering Mark's criminal activities and surviving his murder attempt represented both the worst and best of human nature. His capacity for evil had been matched by the dedication of law enforcement officers, the courage of witnesses like Tom Anderson, and the resilience of families who refused to let his crimes define their futures. Tyler and Chloe have grown into remarkable young adults whose strength and character were forged through unimaginable adversity but never broken by it. Their ability to maintain hope, build healthy relationships, and pursue meaningful goals despite their traumatic childhood demonstrates the human capacity for healing and growth that even the most calculated evil cannot destroy. The story of my marriage to a serial killer serves as a reminder that evil often hides behind facades of respectability and success, but also that truth and justice can prevail when people have the courage to seek them. Our family's survival and recovery prove that even the most devastating betrayals can ultimately lead to stronger, more authentic lives built on genuine rather than deceptive foundations. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.